My generation, I call myself a child of the New Wave, the French New Wave. So my generation, the French New Wave directors, a little bit older than me, our ability to see early cinema, particularly silent films, was rather circumscribed. We had to see them in projection in a theater. I often saw them in battered 16-millimeter prints from the Museum of Modern Art, the silent films. And they usually had no soundtrack on them, so you would watch a film like Last Laugh with no sound at all. And it was difficult, and yet we knew there was value in those films. They did not necessarily look good because the elements were bad elements. There was very little archiving and no restoration of materials at that time. Today, we're able to see so many of these silent films in restored and longer, more fully realized versions that are very close, if not exactly, to what the directors originally intended. They are there, and they're coming to be available more and more in better and better versions. I mean, what is happening with City Girl and restoration of City Girl, a film that was, I won't say lost, but which had kind of slipped through the cracks, but which is a major film. It's an amazing gift that we have, and I just hope that, you know, cineasts and film students will kind of open up to this and look at films like, look at Murnau and see just what incredible work he did, you know, as kind of a inspiration for us as filmmakers today. I looked at Murnau's films, even Sunrise, his first American film, in the context of German expressionist cinema of the 20s. I was a student my junior year as an undergraduate in Vienna and became very familiar with German expressionist art, De Brücke and Blauer Reiter, and also especially Austrian secession art, and particularly Egon Schiele's work. And the sense of human pain and drama in Egon Schiele's work, I found a very strong correspondence in the dramatic insight into character in the Murnau films I was seeing. So a few years later, when I began graduate studies in film at USC, I had the occasion to see other films like Faust, like Tartuffe, obviously Nosferatu, usually in very bad prints at that time, you know. But I got a tremendous sense of the correspondence and the intersection between German expressionist painting and sculpture, which I knew somewhat, and the cinema. And so in a way, I came to Murnau and to German expressionist cinema through the painting and through the art. And in a lot of ways, in terms of investigation of the human drama, the psyche, the kind of stripping bare of the soul, I think Murnau was doing that very much in his films. You know, the stylistic difference, how he might have changed when William Fox brought him to the United States to do Sunrise, it's not an abrupt transition, an abrupt change in style, because Sunrise has very strong echoes and overtones of the German expressionist work. I mean, you look at Sunrise and a lot of it feels very German. It looks very German. So it's a kind of it's a hybrid work, Sunrise. However, by the time you get to City Girl, it feels much, much more American in so many ways. And looking at it recently, I was amazed. I was absolutely amazed at how much an American film it is, what a change he made. Now, of course, there was a film in between Sunrise and City Girl that is a film that's lost to us, you know, Four Devils. And We know it basically only through, piecemeal reconstruction of photographs and the script. But City Girl is really, in a way that Sunrise is not. It's very much an American film in terms of its spirit and its energy. It's kind of optimism and it's kind of excitement in a lot of ways. Whereas, if I can go back to Murnau's German films, they're much more closed in. They're more hermetic, I think. I think they are very much a product of the German and the European historical culture. And in Murnau's American films, the two that we have really before Taboo, the sense of landscape, the sense of people, Americans in space as part of the landscape is so much stronger. And I think that Murnau's ability to transform his conception of character and of the human drama into American experience in City Girl, just in the space of, between Sunrise and City Girl, is absolutely amazing. Every time I look at any scenes from it, especially once Lem and Kate arrive at the farm, the sense of Americanness is almost like, American regionalist painters like, Grant Wood or Thomas Hart Benton, or I think I look at the space and I think of the open prairie music of Aaron Copland even. Here he was, a man who was rooted so much in the German and European cultural experience, who I think was truly becoming an American director. The heart of the film is in the country, and it takes place in a very short period of time, a day and a night. It seems like it's just one day and one night. Whereas in Sunrise, the city is a much stronger character. In other words, there's sort of a reversal between the two films, I think. The city is very dominant at the heart of the emotional relationship in Sunrise. And it's the country, the farm, that is the heart of the drama and the emotional relationship in City Girl. And it's kind of ironic that the title was changed to City Girl. The original title was Our Daily Bread, referring to the wheat. And the wheat is almost a character in City Girl. Certainly the landscape, the wheat fields, when they arrive and they walk and then have that beautiful running shot through the wheat fields, it's like stunning. It's like a sea. It's like another world completely. There's nothing quite like it in American cinema of the time. This energy starting on Kate running, and then he comes in and the camera's sort of trailing them. This reminds me of like moments out of Jules and Jim or something. It's like a quintessentially French New Wave shot. It's just the energy and the excitement here. It's just bursting out of the screen. Well, the harvest scenes in City Girl, have a real strong parallel, you'd say, to the harvest scenes in Days of Heaven. I can't speak for Terrence Malick, regarding whether he knew City Girl or not. I certainly didn't know the film at the time. I suspect Nestor may have known the film because Nestor Almendros, the cinematographer, loved Murnau a lot, and he spoke a lot about Sunrise, and I remember he spoke a lot about Faust and The Last Laugh. In fact, he gave an extensive interview, or wrote an article, I believe, for the American Cinematographer magazine about Sunrise. It was a film he knew intimately. He was a real film scholar. And in his years in France during the 60s, before he came to the United States, he would go to the Cinematheque, and he had his own film club in Cuba. And if a film like City Girl were available, I'm sure he knew it. He never referenced it directly, but there are so many parallels in the use of lighting and other things between Days of Heaven and City Girl that I would be very surprised if he didn't know the film. I was a camera operator on Days of Heaven with Nestor Almendros, so I knew him very well. We had known one another since 1968 when I met him in Paris, and we had stayed friends. It was almost 7 years later before we actually worked together. We shot Days of Heaven in 1976. But whenever I would see him, we'd talk about films, and he had a great love of silent cinema. But the parallels are kind of amazing in terms of, obviously, the look of the wheat fields, the wind, the use of the wind all of the time, the harvesting of the wheat itself. Now, in Days of Heaven, the harvesting machines were, steam-driven, tractors and combines. In City Girl, they were all horse-drawn. But the look and the imagery and the cutting patterns sometimes, the inserts were very similar. This beautiful sequence, a montage dissolved together of almost like a documentary about how wheat is harvested. And yet each shot is aesthetically so beautiful. And this insert that starts, just like as an insert, then develops as the bag of wheat kernels is sewed up. And the camera pans over on this sled, and they slide down into the ground and left behind. It's just a beautiful shot, and then later it's picked up by another wagon. There isn't anything literally quite like that in Days of Heaven, but the feel of the progression of the work is very much the same. And the sense of the light is very much the same too. I think it's a very American kind of montage, anyway, because the wheat fields are so huge and the open space is so huge. The scale is just mammoth. This shot reminds me also of a shot in Days of Heaven. The father here is blowing away the chaff, looking, make sure everything got harvested. And there's a scene at the beginning of the harvest in Days of Heaven where Sam Shepard is walking out into the field, and he picks a few stalks of wheat and crunches it together to get the grains, and he tastes the grains to make sure they're dry enough and they're ready to be harvested. And that shot of the father in the field is oddly very reminiscent of that shot in Days of Heaven. This is an amazing moment here. There's Lem driving the team of horses. Obviously that's not background process. They actually had the camera up there on the harvester because they didn't have process or background at that time. And there it is again. The way the camera is put on moving vehicles all the way through this, on wagons, we'll see later in the night scene with the runaway buckboard and everything. But here, all of this is actually practical. None of it is done any rear screen processing or any kind of matte photography. Here she's serving up, to all the hands are coming in. It's also curious that there's a similar scene of everybody eating the food during the middle of the harvest scene in Days of Heaven, which leads into a fight between Richard Gere and one of the hands when one of the hands makes an insulting remark about Brooke Adams, and they get into a fight. But the parallels, in terms of just between Days of Heaven and certain scenes in this movie are uncanny. This is actually really interesting how they come in and watch some of the other hands throw the plates. This is great. Watch. I love this moment. Boom, boom. It's just, the film is full of just like almost impromptu moments like that. It's not stuff that I think could have been scripted. I think the actors just decide to come up with it. And that's one of the things that's wonderful about this film, and it's the kind of thing you don't often see, I think, in Murnau's German work, which was so much more constrained and so much more controlled. There's something that happened to him, I think, by the time he got to this film, and he had kind of sort of made that transition from the tightness and expressionism of Sunrise to the kind of looser quality here, where everything about it is so, it's very American in its kind of loose feeling. Nestor referenced a lot when he was talking to students, film students and other people, a particular French painter named Georges de Latour. And there's a series of paintings that de Latour did of Mary Magdalene holding an oil lamp, or an oil lamp right next to her. And the source of the light, it's very dramatic, a single source on her coming from that lamp. And Nestor spoke about that series of paintings a lot. And I know that source lighting, meaning a light that you can actually sometimes see in the frame that is either the real or the nominal source of lighting for the scene, was very important to him. And when we were doing Days of Heaven, the night scenes, especially the wheat harvest at night and fighting the fire, where people are running around with the lanterns, those were actual lanterns that had very bright bulbs in them. And the glass was frosted over so that you could not see that it was a bare light bulb rather than a kerosene wick. And they actually lit the scene. Some of the other scenes were actually lit by bonfires. There's a famous shot of people coming down the river on a boat, dancing around a bonfire that's burning on a barge, and that was all existing light. And you can see that it was just the available light because the lens aperture was opened so much that the color of the fire was burned out, because the fire was the actual light source. In City Girl, we see these lanterns on a number of times. The first time is very dramatic. The father and the mother are sitting at a table, and there's a window behind them, and their parents are just waiting, and a boy arrives with a telegram from Lem saying that he's married Kate and that he's coming back. And this lamp that you see on the table is actually a major light source. It's not the light that is lighting the mother so much, but it's certainly lighting the tabletop and the father's face. And when the boy comes to the window to deliver the telegram and father tilts the lampshade, you'll see the way the edge of the bottom of the lampshade makes a hard cut against the back wall. And it's not an off-screen effect that's done with a supplemental light. It's actually this light. And to use an actual key light or the source light as the real light in a scene was very unusual at this time. Usually they were enhanced and supplemented. It's a real piece of Americana. I mean, I know there's shots like this in Murnau's other films, people at tables and so forth, but there's something about the composition of it that is so classically sort of American farm. It's like a few years later when you think of photographs from the Farm Security Administration of Roy Stryker's photographers like Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange and Margaret Burke White. This image really evokes that kind of spirit of farm, rural America during the 30s. And this is a sort of an American Gothic moment. You can actually see the shadow from the lamp on the boy's face. I'm convinced that was not an effect that they were doing. It was actually a very bright light in that lamp, because the timing, the syncing of that move is absolute perfect. Then when he gets up, the father gets up and goes to the window and gets a telegram, you see his shadow from a low angle on the back wall, and it corresponds exactly, the movement of it, to that light source. Look at his shadow. See the way the shadow goes from low up, then he walks out of it, and he comes back down, and that's him leaning into the light. You can see the cut right across his eyes and his forehead. That was an unusual thing to do at the time, to actually have a light that was in the scene actually be the light that lit the scene. And that lantern is used many times during that night scene of the impending storm. And when the workers and Mac, who seems to be the foreman of the group, they're up in the bunks upstairs. and there is a lantern on the floor. Now, almost everything up here in this loft is lit, partly because of the ceiling. It's so low and you actually see the ceiling. It's actually lit from below eye level. See the shadow going up on the back wall on Lim? It's off camera left. There's the light. You can actually see the light in the corner of the frame. Now, that is not the light that's actually lighting him. It's doing something, but it's a supplemental light. It's what we call the nominal source. And that lantern in front of Lim there in the lower left corner of the frame stays there through the whole thing. You can see how long the shadow is. So, you can actually see right behind that lantern the hot pillow. There's and actors see walking right in front of you. You can see how bright they are. So he blows it out and they turn a supplemental light off. That light is actually quite bright, but there was a supplemental light doing it. Now there's another light from off camera right that is providing the extra illumination. And here's the father again, in front of this same practical, the lampshade that he tilted before, and it's actually a very much a working practical light. There's that lampshade effect again, where he brings it in. Now this shot, it was actually doing that. I think that was the actual practical lamp. You can see it actually moving, the shade moving. And so these were actual light sources in the picture that were lighting the scene. And it's something that Ernest Palmer did, that the cinematographer, that was not all that common. I mean, there were use of apparent light sources that would then be enhanced or duplicated off camera, with another powerful lamp. But in these cases, these were actually very bright lamps that were wired and they were hooked into the set. Now here's an example of a supplemental off-camera light. See the moving shadow above Mac's head? That was another light source that they were actually moving in the shot. So this kind of use of real source lighting and nominal source lightings with off-camera lights enhancing it is something that very much came from German Expressionist cinema, and which I think Murnau brought with him, because you see it in his German films, and which I think was incorporated, whether it was Karl Struss and Rocher or Ernest Palmer or whoever was doing Murnau's films. I think that stylistic use of the lighting was integrated into his American films from Germany. This is beautiful. Kate there, that's her shadow off camera. Then she moves into the shot here. She's in front of a bright light and then just moves into the shot. While outside, the hands are going by carrying bright lanterns themselves. Now, the lanterns are bright, but there's also probably another light source off camera that is sweeping across the window as they pass, that is making it even brighter. Now this is an example of that is not the actual light that's doing it. You'll see it doesn't move exactly in sync. It's working around a little different. In other words, there is a bright light that's lighting her, but there's a separate light that was lighting the back wall, with a flag, a gobo moving up and down with the lamp. Then later on, when Mac comes and tries to force Kate to run away with him, and he cut his hand, and she puts the iodine on it and bandages it. There is a hard break about halfway up the wall where the lower half of their bodies has full light, and up above it's darker. And here's that very dramatic slashed lit light on the back walls. This figures all the way through this night stuff. Now today, if we were to do the same effect, we would probably actually have much less light on their faces. We would not bring them up so bright, we'd play them actually even darker. But that effect was very unusual at that time. Usually it was always the actor's face that was lit, and you would make the lower half of the body darker for dramatic effect. And if you look at, say, somewhat in The Last Man, but especially in Faust, You know, Faust is very theatrical and very dramatic. It's almost stage-like, the lighting at times, where the lights are like spotlights lighting Faust or Mephistopheles' face, and other whole areas going dark, what we would call Rembrandt lighting. But the lighting in City Girl, in those night scenes, is much more realistic, much more naturalistic. It's dramatic. It's very dramatic and expressionistic, but the grounding of it is very real. It's an uncanny mixture of realism and expressionism. And I think City Girl is one of the best examples of that kind of blending of styles I can think of in early cinema. Had Murnau lived beyond taboo and had not been killed in that automobile accident so young, I think there's no question that he would have become one of the major American storytellers, a kind of John Ford in a way. You know, I think he would have gone more in that direction. I don't know, that's just my feeling. I don't know that there's any surviving scholarship where he may have talked about that or not, but just looking at City Girl, which I think is a very underrated film. You know, Sunrise I know gets so much of the credit, but I think the reputation of City Girl is going to increase, you know, year by year.